Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of 10,000 Heroes. I'm your host, Ankur Shah Delight. This is episode 105 of the 10,000 Heroes show, and it's the first episode of season 7. What I'm focusing on this season is interviews explicitly focused on purpose. So I'm going to ask each guest this season 3 questions. 1, why are you here? Or what is your understanding of purpose today? 2, how did you get here? Which should allow for some fun and inspiring storytelling. And 3, how can this community serve you? And I'm going to try to get a little bit deeper than just buy my stuff or read my books or whatever, but actually how can we serve that person in their journey to their vision? So with this season, there's 3 things I'm really trying to do. 1 is to make purpose okay again, rescue it from the ashes of religion, because I really think we need it. 2 is to see if we can build an actual community with a web of loving relationships through a podcast where people haven't actually met in person until I throw a party later on. And 3 is to expose how purpose happens and the great variety of ways that process might look like for each of us. My guest today is Fabiana Fondevila. Fabiana is a storyteller, a teacher, and a spiritual activist whose main passion is turning awe and inspiration into life-affirming action. And this is something we get into a lot in the interview about how just awe and wonder and being in tune with our spirituality is really not enough, at least for her and her purpose these days. She is the author of Where Wonder Lives, Practices for Cultivating the Sacred in Your Daily Life. Fabiana is currently writing a book about igniting and expanding what she calls the vital impulse in our personal and collective lives, and we do talk about that in the episode. All right, let's jump in. Okay, fabulous. And so what I want to do today, I'm really excited to do this with you because it's the first time we're going to do the new format that I discussed in that video and announced on the podcast, where we're really explicitly focusing on purpose. And I want to model this like cocktail party I'm imagining in the future where it's just like normal to go in and be like, so why are you here? So that's what I want to do today. That's question number 1. And then, question number 2 is more of like, how did you get here? How did you come to know that? What was your bumpy and circuitous process like to get to that? And maybe we can get into like, is it important to have purpose? Like, what is the role? Do we care anymore just because like in modern society we killed the gods? Do we still need purpose? We could discuss a little bit of that.
Right.
And then the part 3 is more of like how the community can support you in your journey.
Okay, wonderful. I like that scheme that you created. That's so cool. That's a good format. I think people will go for it. I
Cool.
like that.
And so I'm realizing I should have a wine glass and I should have like sent you a wine glass, but I don't. So I've got this
We
teacup.
can go. Okay, I have my coffee cup, so we can do that if you want.
So we're like, so why are you here?
That's so cool. So are we beginning already?
Yeah, I think here we are. Yeah.
Okay, so you want to do that again? Sorry, I wasn't sure that we were going to start.
Yeah. I know. I'm just like, we just jumped into it. So Fabiana, why are you here?
That's an excellent question, isn't it? I'll begin by telling you this, which is the way it's kind of meshing a little bit of my history, but I'll go as quickly to the point as I can. If you had asked me that like 10 years ago, I would have said that I was here to be the voice of awe and wonder. And that was my driving motive and passion for many, many years. And that's what my first book is about. And it's still a very vital element in my life. But since then, many things have happened to the world and things have gotten kind of heavy on the side of, the planetary events and dangers and the urgency that everything's taken on so many levels and so many dimensions, that it now feels more urgent for me personally to be the voice of vitality and aliveness. And I can tell you what I mean by that. But that's why I'm here right now, to be a beacon for everybody to embody their aliveness as deeply and authentically and vibrantly as they can. So aliveness is the key word.
Beautiful.
Am I making sense so far?
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, somewhat, but you're making enough nonsense that I want to ask like 1,000 more questions. So I think that's really good. This is exactly perfect.
Okay.
And
Okay, great.
I guess, like, every good answer leads to dozens more questions,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
And
of
so
course.
then, I mean, what is essentially the difference
Hmm.
between awe and wonder and vitality?
The issue with awe and wonder, which are, just to give a very brief and personal definition, is what happens to us when we encounter mystery in any form, is that explosion of open-eyed and open-hearted and an open mind as well, that is impacted from outside. Although sometimes it can come from memories and things that go on inside, but mostly it's provoked by some experience in the outside world that leaves us breathless and open mouthed, and it sort of stops us in our tracks and reminds us of the beauty and marvel and uncanniness of the world. How can this be is the question of wonder, right? How can this be? How can this humongous sky full of stars, and how come, a little baby was just born and some old person has just died at the same time, and somebody's falling in love and the world is turning in this empty space, and all of this is happening at the same time, and it's mind-blowing, right? So I've always wanted to shake myself up and others from that, um, I wouldn't say weariness because I don't ever really feel weary, but that the eyes of just becoming accustomed to things
Yeah.
as they are and going on, business as usual, when nothing is ever as usual. Everything is
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
impossibly mysterious, right?
And
So,
that seems to me to be the paradox of it, is that the default mode,
hmm
most of us, including myself, who, I mean, I'm
hmm
like, feel like as tuned into magic and wonder as who I would want to be, but still 90% of my time I'm just doing business as
hmm
usual. And and
exactly.
then, like, even when I'm going on a hike and I'm like hiking,
Hmm
I'm like duh, 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 and then I'll get to one specific tree and be like, oh, holy shit.
mm
What does it mean that this tree has lived here for 800 years and has uncountable branches and leaves and the little holes where it breathes through the leaves and all this stuff? And then
Right.
it's just that moment of like, wow. And so, okay, so that's, is it part of your quest at that time was to help us be more in touch with that and not just being the like, business as usual.
Exactly, exactly. I wanted to help us all be the voice of awe and wonder, and to have it be not so much a once in every blue moon kind of occurrence, and turn it more into an everyday kind of experience. And that's what I tried to accomplish with my first book. My first book for adults is called Where Wonder Lives: Practices for Cultivating the Sacred in Everyday Life. And that's what I tried to do. It's a map of wonder, of the places where I've found wonder and consistently find wonder in my life today, and practices to get there. So that's where I went first. But the difference, going back to your question, is that in a way, even though it's so invigorating in the moment, it can be kind of a passive experience in the sense that you take it in sort of from the outside. You have this whole um, bodily experience going on, which has been studied since. When I wrote my book, there wasn't as much awe and wonder science yet as there is today. And so now we know what's going on, what's coursing through your veins, the kinds of hormones and the kinds of situations that arise. And people do tend, it's not entirely, it's not passive in the sense that it does leave us in a more connected state. So that's true about wonder and all. You tend to feel more expansive and more connected, but not necessarily more active, in the world. A lot of it tends to make you want to just take it in and sort of stop there and relish and revel in the largeness of it, the vastness of it, the incomprehensibility of it. And it's a spiritual experience, right? It's what happens to us in the presence of mystery, capital M, mystery. But as I said before, things have gotten so progressively more urgent in the world with extreme weather events and the polarization on the political front, and climate change just growing and growing with nothing seeming to be able to enough to stop it. And somehow it felt like just stopping in awe at wonder was not the ticket, was not what we need to do right now in order to mobilize and catalyze everybody towards action. So a part of me was looking for the next step, as if wonder and awe were the catalyzers, the first emotion that comes to mind, and gratitude alongside it, because a lot of, awe and wonder does provoke a sense of gratitude. But then how do we turn that into action for others and for the world? And that's how I slowly evolved this idea of aliveness that I now want to tell you about, because it's not just feeling alive, which is the gist of it, but it's a little bit more, I wouldn't say complex. I hope the word is rich. It's richer the way I've been coming about it.
Okay. But
So it's, yeah.
before we go into that though, I just want to slow
Okay.
down a little bit and make the problem a little more I don't know, open or brutal. Uh,
Okay.
so just this book, you wrote this book that
Hmm.
could help us if we read it, get in touch with awe and wonder. And what
Hmm.
you're saying, if I understand correctly, is that even if everybody read it and everybody used it and everyone was going around in awe and wonder all the time, effectively, and having a really
Hmm.
powerful spiritual experience,
Yes.
you were like, not good enough,
Not
not
enough.
helpful, something like that.
Something like that, because at the time, I didn't tackle the collective aspect of the challenges we're facing today. I mostly focused on what helps me feel connected and awestruck. And I do still think it's an important first step. I think we all need more of that in our lives. So it's not like I'm saying don't read the book. I think it would be a really good idea to read the book, because it's an it's a peon, it's an invitation to experience life more fully. So I still think that's a very important first step, or a step in the right direction, or a nudge in the direction of, okay, wake up and smell the roses. We are living in an awesome planet. We are living in a planet that is not awesome only when you remember to go outside at night and look at the stars. It's consistently awesome. It's us
Mm,
who are not always tuned in to its awesomeness, right?
yeah.
So the book is showing you, it's a map, it's kind of a personal map, as all maps are, showing you the places where I find the most awe and wonder. And it has to do with relationships and nature and the senses and etc. So yes, I do think that is like a good place to start. But I do think that, um, since things are at a point right now where it's kind of an all hands on deck situation, and we need everybody to be very aware of their responsibility. In fact, there's a beautiful book by an astronomer poet called Responsibility to Awe. And I do think now, in terms more of a responsibility, but not just to awe, which again is as perfect a starting point as I can think, but to action in the name of awe, in the name of all that is alive. So that's where I came to the idea, the concept of aliveness, as a way to connect two very important pieces of why we're all here, not just me, why we're all here.
Yeah.
So maybe I can,
I want to, I still want
yeah,
to, there's something in here I want to get. So I'm going to try and put it even more starkly to just
okay.
share what I'm learning from it. Because I think it's actually a really challenging idea to a whole current of modern life, which is
Mhm.
the current that emphasizes spirituality and meditation. And
Exactly.
and the argument goes something like this. Currently, if you judge by our actions, humans as a whole, we're being assholes to the planet.
Yes, we
Right.
are.
And
Agree.
then second, you're like, if you're saying if everybody had a spiritual awakening and was in touch with their spirituality, was in touch with their connectedness to the other beings, they had appreciation of nature, of each other, that wouldn't be enough and we would still be being assholes.
Yes, that's what I personally think. I'm
Yeah.
sorry to say.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, it's great. Yeah.
Because the truth is, we've had, millenary, wisdom traditions and religions and all kinds of spiritual maps, and they haven't kept us from destroying the planet. So I don't think it's enough. I do think it's one core element. And I think the other important piece is, how do we become activists in the name of responsibility to our belongingness? How do we become, you could call it spiritual activists. I like to call it vital activists in the name of life. And so when I talk about aliveness,
Yeah.
what I want to emphasize, because aliveness is a very wide and vast term, you could think of it in so many ways. I mean, we're all biologically alive just because we're breathing and our hearts are beating. Then there's a sense, the sensation of being alive, which Sometimes we feel more than others, and sometimes it's at odd moments, or when you're doing something in nature, or you're loving somebody, or many places places and situations and experiences that make us come alive. But what I arrived at least it makes sense for me, is to think of two components in relation to aliveness. One component is the more personal one, and I call it desire, which is getting in touch with your desire and your motivation. In fact, you could call it purpose too, although purpose kind of straddles both. So desire is that autonomous, self-determinant, self-realizing aspect of us that not only wants to go towards what it loves and what it feels enamored of and what it is attracted to, but also towards its own evolution and highest expression, this force that we called eros. Mostly the Greeks used this word eros, even though they kind of circumscribed it to a love of another, but eros in the sense of vital force. I do think that we need to get in touch with that inner flame. And sometimes spiritual traditions nourish this, and sometimes not so much. It depends on the kind of spiritual tradition and the way it's implemented. I think there's an active component, a yang component, which has to do with kindling the inner fire.
Yeah.
And
And
that's a
there's a lot of
person, and
traditions
that's
that
a
are like kind of suppressing or judgmental of desire. And you're saying,
exactly,
no, we
exactly.
want to encourage it.
We want to encourage desire. It's the motor of life. It's the fuel of life. What is beating, what is alive for you now? What is calling you? What is beckoning you? What are you alive or passionate or even curious about? Because sometimes people don't think in terms of passion, but I do think we need that. And there's a quote that I really love that kind of encapsulates this aspect by Howard Thurman, the great theologian and civil rights activist. He said, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive and go do that. What the world needs is people who have come alive. So I do feel very strongly that we need to find that and nourish that and continually be sort of activists for our own vitality. If you're not feeling enlivened by your work, your relationships, the way you're living, then do something differently in order to fuel that passion, that personal passion for life in yourself. And then the other part, because that in itself is just one half of it. The other half is a trickier one to describe, but I'll do my best. I call it surrender because I think it's like a nice counterpart to desire. And it has to do with a state of receptivity and openness to a sense of living in a larger community of beings, a larger community of nature, or even just the universe, however you conceive of it. We are not individuals, we are part of a bigger whole. And if we are too drawn in the direction solely of our personal desire, and we forget to connect with the desires and needs of others, then of course what happens is we lose our grounding and we are cut off from our roots, because our roots are always embedded in this greater wholeness. So we can only go so far cherishing and nourishing our own desire if we forget to also continually and actively belong and to nourish our belongingness, our roots in that larger whole. So, and then there's this surrender aspect, which if you wanted to use Greek terms, it would be a little bit more like agape. Eros was the personal, passionate love, and agape was more of an unconditional, universal kind of love. But it doesn't encompass exactly what I mean. It's just sort of in the same vicinity. I feel like we need to constantly be returning to this belongingness. So this is what I want to do. This is what I'm on fire with or about today. What's happening with you? Where do you want to take this? Where do you want to go? What do you think is important? How can we collaborate? How can we meet halfway? This is like a constant dialogue in not only in relationships and in society, but in nature and in almost anything we do. We need to find a way to incorporate these two dimensions and to not polarize towards one and the other. Because just as I said before, you can take desire too far if you lose
Yeah,
this
we
connection.
see examples of that everywhere.
Of course, but let me just give you an example of what would be a polarization of the other, because
Yeah.
normally you don't think that that there could be too much of this belongingness, but there can be. If a person is too, and this happens to women a lot, if they're too centered on service and what the other person needs, and to constantly be either, asking permission or basically being attentive to the needs of another or of a community, then you lose yourself and you
Oh,
lose
man.
that vital spark. So we constantly need to find a way to weave these two together. And I think something happens as you grow older. We can get into that as well, but with these two elements, these two energies. But I don't know if so far it's making sense.
It is. It is. I really, I mean, I want to get to more like your life and kind of how this came about for you,
Okay.
but just to stay on the intellectual plane for a second, I find it so confusing. And maybe it's because I have a sense of this balance and I have for a time, why the messaging is so exclusive. Like they were kind of pushing this thing that's like, well, now you have to choose whether you're going to be a selfish asshole or you're going to care about other people and be involved in like self-denial. You know, it seems like that's the messaging we get. And then we have to try one and be really imbalanced in one
Totally.
or the other for decades before we can be like, no,
Right.
we can have both.
We have to have both. We need both to
Yeah.
survive, basically, not even just to flourish. Yeah, I agree with you completely. It's been really thwarted and misguided, and a lot of religions, even spiritual traditions, for some reason have come down or have been transmitted. Maybe, I don't know, if originally that's how they were intended, but they do sort of get to us with this very confusing or misguided message of, love is only about being there for others, and
Yeah.
spirituality is only about serving whatever principle or God you consider represents divinity, and that there does seem to be a choice to be made, and it's always a little bit confusing when it reaches you this way. And there's a beautiful, just things that are coming to me. There's a beautiful fragment of a poem by Mary Oliver that I always come to when people. I teach classes, right? I teach workshops, and so people come with these ideas all the time. And a lot of people, I'll get back to the Mary Oliver quote, but let me explain why I'm bringing her in. A lot of people, especially women, who have had so much trouble loving themselves and prioritizing themselves, are now have been following, gurus and teachers that emphasize the self-love so much that it's become misguided, because now they think that's the point of spirituality, and that's crazy because of course it's not that at all. So it's a stepping stone, right? So I always bring this quote by Mary Oliver that ends, it's actually part of a larger poem, and it says, love yourself, then forget about it, then love the world, which is a beautiful synthesis, right? Love yourself, you have to start there or get there eventually, then forget about it, then love the world. So, but yes, we do get a kind of uh, stunted version of all this,
Yeah.
and yeah, and especially it's not taught to us as something organic. And I do think there's something very organic about the way we encounter these two energies, because we encounter them since we're babies. It's not like somebody has to teach you, that you're going to be in relation to others, and those people are going to be at the beginning, in fact, their life itself. Your mother. We don't even learn to love ourselves until later down the road, really, because you learn to love by loving another, your mother first, and then your father, and then your siblings and your friends. And if everything goes well, you kind of tend to incorporate yourself into the mix at some point, and you learn to be better at that too. But it's always intertwined. It's not like these are two separate lessons, right? I do think something happens as we grow older and we mature, which is interesting with these two energies that we can get to. But I don't know if I answered that part of it.
Yeah, no, it's really perfect. But I guess I'm curious, like in your journey to
Yeah.
this moment where you're at, what helped you integrate those things? Or at what point did you step off the normal track that we're all on of having to choose between one and the other?
Yeah, well, I had a lot of struggles, like almost everybody, I imagine, because I was not brought up in a spiritual or religious tradition. My family was atheist. My mother was a psychoanalyst and very militantly atheist,
Yeah.
and my father was neither here nor there when it came to that. So I was very much a spiritual orphan. For some reason, I did feel a penchant, a need to explore these domains. And so it took me a long time to find adequate words, because none of them made sense in the context of my family upbringing, very intellectual, not even agnostic, atheist tradition. And the beginnings of my search were a little bit, shall I say, I sort of tried on different religions for size to see if any of them fit.
Oh,
And of course,
cool.
yeah,
Like
I went
a
with
few like
the,
cults here and there, or like what
yeah,
kind of stuff did you get into?
not so much culture. Maybe one, I would say one might have been cultish, but I tried Judaism because my mother's side was Jewish, but
Hmm.
the kind of intellectual Judaism, and it was culturally Jewish, but not religiously so. So,
Yeah.
but I tried to find something there, and I just had the food basically. I just knew how to make Jewish cuisine. That's all that was really granted to me, which is funny enough because my daughter, who's now an adult, recently has started going through the same thing, and she's now asking me for Jewish recipes, and I'm not sure what she's looking to find, but she's interested suddenly in our Jewish heritage from an intellectual standpoint. Anyhow, so I went through different religions and even Buddhism, and I kept a few, pearls here and there. But the more cultish aspect I was going to mention, just to humor you, was you may have heard of Wicca, Wicca. It's
Oh yeah.
like neo-paganism. And I felt very attracted to it at first because it happens in relation to nature and no temples, no authority figures. And so I kind of went for that for a little while. But then it became maybe just because I didn't go to right sources, probably, but it felt a little bit too much like magical thinking. So that kind of drew me away. It was a lot of spells and a lot of asking for things. And I don't know, I didn't jibe with that. So that kind of went on its way. I moved on from there as well. But nature stayed with me. It's been really my most essential teacher and accompaniment and source of wonder. And then, I had children, and children kind of get you in touch with the basics, the essentials, as they will do. And I don't know, I wanted to teach them this larger sense feeling of belongingness that I felt, but I had no words for. And we found that in nature so easily. I mean, it was just so organic, just going out with them, looking for treasures in wherever in our walks, and finding so much sustenance and magic and enchantment and meaning in all of those excursions, and telling them stories. I write children's stories, so it was a very natural course for me to write about these natural wonders with a little bit of fairy tale magic to them, but also I think fairy tales and that kind of magical, enchanted way of looking at things is onto the right, is onto some very essential truth, even though it disguises it in metaphorical terms. And I don't know, my children went to a Waldorf school, so there was a lot of talk about,
Yeah.
archetypes and dragons and princes and princesses. And I once asked my my kid's kindergarten teacher, who was a wise woman, an elder woman, why so much emphasis on them dressing like princes and princesses. And she said something wonderful. She answered something amazing. She said, because they are, because children are princes and princesses. And I totally understood what she meant. She was talking about them getting in touch with and recognizing their inner gold, their inner divinity, the fact that they're all each so special. So I think sometimes using the language of children's stories, such as dragons and and kings and warriors, and we're really talking about some very essential truths.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Fabiana. When my daughter was born, and there was all these people giving us things that related to princesses and the whole like Disney, in the US, there's this like Disney princess thing and people are dressing up and this, and I was really against it. And
Mm-hmm.
as I just saw it as aristocratic
Merchandising.
culture.
Oh,
Like, well,
right.
there's the capitalist aspect, but then there's just the aristocracy. And I was like, I don't want anything to do with the aristocracy. But then I read, as I was reading her, all the, fairy tale, all the books have this in it. And I was like, oh, this is actually like a deep metaphor for the journey of the soul. And almost like in like the Plato sense of the Republic, of becoming the king of this individual being and putting like order into the soul. And it's like, all right, there's some really, it's really deep and it's really beautiful. But then there is also this like, you have to like, tell my 6-year-old that yes, you are a princess, you are going to become a queen, and you're not ordering people around, and you don't have servants, and this is not aristocratic culture that we're in, and I'm definitely not your servant. Like you have to separate that, otherwise they get into that
Yeah.
whole like spoiled world of it, right?
Yes,
On all the
completely.
levels.
Completely. But also just if you think about the way those stories speak to us and to children metaphorically, and there's some really beautiful work about this by Jungian analysts like Marie-Louise von Franz. There's a couple of really interesting books about reading the symbology in all these tales and what they're really talking about when they talk about the dragon or beating the dragon. And they really are speaking directly to kids' souls and imaginations, and children really understand this. And there's another, I'm full of quotes today, but there's another beautiful line by Chesterton, the English writer, and he said, stories don't tell kids about dragons because they want to tell them that dragons exist. Kids know that dragons exist. It tells them about dragons so that they know that dragons can be beaten, can be conquered, can be defeated. So that's pretty powerful language, right? And that is what these stories are about. They're the heroic journey and fighting for your life and for your beliefs and for the people you love. And that's everywhere in children's tales. And also they're not squeamish about the darkness of the world, which is another part of it that I think is important, and that spiritual traditions sometimes leave out a little bit. And I think it's really important that we keep, in the center of our vision, that we don't forget that life can be brutal and is often brutal, and so are we. So in that sense, one really shining light in my life, going back to my journey, has been Joseph Campbell. I just mentioned the heroic journey or hero's myth, and that was kind of a before and after. There's been two authors that have really done that for me. One is Joseph Campbell, kind of a spiritual father, and I would say that a spiritual mother has been Mary Oliver, the poet, like for so many people, just because she helped me get in touch with my own poetry and my own sense of devotion to the natural world. But going back to Campbell, one of the things that really attracted me to about his work is the fact that he doesn't ever sugarcoat things. He tells it like it is, and he says at some point, he says life is both a wondrous mystery and a monstrosity, and it's both at the same time, in the sense that monstrous things do happen all the time, and it's not just because humans provoke them, but in the center of it there's a sweetness, he says. And to me, that sweetness is love. He doesn't say it in so many words, but I think that's what he's talking about. So if we embrace this paradoxical or multifaceted view of life as this wondrous mystery that is at the same time so perilous and so uncertain and at sometimes so brutal, then how do we include all of that in our aliveness? And again, I come back to this issue of aliveness because it has so many ramifications. The more I look at it, the more I realize that it's also about realizing we live in a planet that is alive, and everything around us is alive, and other people are alive with their own wishes and needs and hang-ups and shadows like we have ours. So if we're going to be an active part of this feast and at the same time are going to be responsible citizens of the world, then we need to include this very complex picture and not just choose, I just want to, celebrate beauty, or I just want to fight injustice. I think we kind of need to, I don't want to say do it all because that sounds kind of exhausting. It's not that we need to do it all, but we can't leave out the essential bits, and the essential components I think has to do with how do I bring myself alive every morning and commit to whatever it is, whatever small part of this is turning me on and making me feel excited and impassioned and willing to go out and really do smile at the world and enjoy it. And at the same time, this responsibility to others and to belonging to the larger things that are happening around me. So again, I think because otherwise, if you don't include this other aspect, the risk is, if you were just to say, okay, just go out and do whatever makes you feel alive. Of course, a murderer feels very alive, probably, right, when they're killing someone,
Yeah.
or if you're robbing someone, or whatever it else that you could do, that is not life affirming.
Yeah.
So in the center of this aliveness that I propose as a compass, a good place to start, is the fact that it has to be life affirming. And I take a lot of inspiration for this for this concept from a relatively new field or discipline called biomimicry. I don't know if you've heard of biomimicry.
Just the word, but I'd love to go into it a little bit.
Okay, so biomimicry, there's kind of three words that I like to weave together. One you probably have heard of because it's a little bit older, which is biophilia, love of life and everything that is alive. That is originally from Erich Fromm, a German philosopher and psychologist. He spoke a lot about this idea of how human beings have this innate love of life and of everything that is alive. And then so that's biophilia. Biomimicry, which is not exactly related, but I like to relate them, is the study of life and natural processes to help us solve human problems. So how can we imitate the best of what nature does? And instead of, moving away from it, how do we get closer to it and observe how do they dispose waste? How do they solve conflicts? All kinds of actually technological solutions are coming out of this field. But there's one principle of life that they enunciated this way, and I've really taken it and ran with it because I love it so much. And the principle is, or the idea is, life tends to produce conditions conducive to life. So life begets life, even by including death, of course, in this process. But if you look at the way ecosystems evolve, how we used to think that it was all about competition and fight of the survival of the fittest, and now we know that what's mostly going on is cooperation, right? So there's a way in which life is always feeding life, and Campbell said the same thing, in other words. So what I'm thinking is, if we are naturally biophiliac, so we all feel this instinctive love of life, how can we become ambassadors for life? How can we do what nature organically does, which is to foster life and do things that beget more life, not just for me, but for my environment, for my neighborhood, for my community, for the people I love? So that's where this sort of two-sided definition of aliveness comes in. I want to be fully alive myself and to get in touch with that inner fire. And at the same time, I want to include the inner life of others because I want to do as nature does. I want to foster life. I want wherever I've been to have a feeling of greater aliveness for anybody involved, and that includes, of course, not being violent, not putting anybody down, not excluding others, but actually doing what you can. This sounds very ambitious, and I want to bring it down to earth a little bit more, because it's not like we're going to be world saviors, but wherever, in a very small way, whatever life you touch, can you leave that person enlivened? Can you leave that person feeling more connected to their own life rather than less? And there's a whole ethos to this. There's a whole way of acting. And so I've started to toy around with a word that I don't know. I think it exists, but in a very remote discipline. And that would be biopraxis. Biophilia is love of life. Biomimicry is imitating life. And biopraxis would be acting on behalf of life. I'm just sort of thinking of a word that could help encompass this very ambitious concept. But really what it comes down
Define
to
it again. What did you say? Biopraxis? Acting in a way
would
that
be acting on behalf of life.
acting on
As
behalf
if, yeah, as if we were all ambassadors to life, as if that were like a litmus test or a question that you can ask yourself before you do something. Is this going to enhance life for others? And again, it doesn't have to be for set generations to come, which is, of course, would be wonderful. But even just to think, if I'm at a park and I leave, do I want to leave this park better or worse than when I was here, for others to enjoy it more, for the birds to feel more? And that has so many applications or ramifications, how you relate to the animals in your yard, how you relate to your neighbors, how you relate to your own emotions even.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I can really see how where you started with this awe and wonder is a beautiful, I don't know if necessary, but maybe necessary prerequisite for
yeah.
both of these, both for like the endogenous desire
Mm-hmm.
and for this feeling connected and wanting to support the larger community of life.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm glad you see that, because that first impact, which to me was the entryway to spiritual experience, really, I'm not, I don't I'm not a believer. I don't believe in God. I don't have faith in the traditional religious sense. So that's not how it came about. Maybe I did a little bit as a child, but it's gone in other directions. Now I don't believe in, in a personal God, but I do find a spiritual connection, a sense of devotion, I would say every day. And I can't say every moment because just as you said, I get into my head more than I would like to, of course, but it's not very difficult for me to come back to that sense of love of life. It's really close by. And awe and wonder have been portals to that. It's um, I came across the work of, you probably heard, or I imagine Dr. Keltner, who speaks about awe, and he's just published a book about awe recently. I think it's called Awe, in fact. He's a researcher that's been doing work on awe and wonder. And I think he was surprised himself when he did this research for his book. He imagined that people would report awe like a once every few years, and actually people reported awe. I think it was twice a week, having a moment of awe. And I think we can go a lot further than that. I think and that's what I teach in my courses. Really, that's one of my main focus is getting people to be wonder prone, to
Mm.
find it easily around you and to promote it and actively, enhance it, or just feed that flame. Because I think it's a good portal and a good entryway, but it's not the end point. I've come to realize
Yeah.
because of the situation that we're in. We can't just stand wrapped in awe looking at the stars anymore, because if we do that, there will be no more place to stand in a short while. So, everybody, I think poets and writers and painters and anybody that's been dazzled by and enamored of the natural world has to become an activist of some kind now, because really that's our responsibility. But I don't want that to go so far that it tears us apart from this inner drive, that I think, that inner desire that I think we need to keep alive. That's what makes everything make sense. If you can't enjoy and find pleasure and a sense of deep fulfillment in your everyday and in your personal path, then it becomes draining and exhausting.
Yeah.
So,
And it's really not sustainable. Like anything we try to
um,
do that's not based on joy, we're going to end up just
um,
being drained and tired and be like, oh, screw it. I'm not going to do that anymore. Burnout. Right.
burnout,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes, I think that definitely is in your path if that's the way you go about it. And a lot of people are realizing this and sort of tuning into this other way of, putting yourself in the picture, and not just putting yourself in. Maybe that's at the crux, at the center of what I'm exploring in the new book that I'm writing, which is that this is what I'm writing about now. And it's a heightened awareness and perception and felt sense of life beckoning us to really live every day as if it were the first or the last, to
Yeah.
really connect to the improbability of this existence that we're all living in. Of course, the short, recently I read a book by, I think it was Oliver Berkman, and he had this wonderful line, it's about time. It's called Time Management for Mortals. I liked it a lot. And he said, if you think about it, this unforgivably short time span that we have, if we compare it to the time span of the universe, right? So that could be a source of irritation, or it can be a source of motivation, right? It's ridiculously short if you think about it, because we're going to be gone very soon, and the trees will still be here, thankfully, and the mountains. So that should create a sense of urgency, but not an angst provoking, although there will be times for when it will provoke some anxiety, inevitably. But I think it could be um, a call to joy, to a greater, more embodied, more wholehearted sense of joy, because we're here at all, And so I hope, and I think there's a kind of a change of a turning of tides in this direction. I saw a few titles of people calling for a more joyful kind of activism. I think the time has come, because, and there's a author, you may have known him too, Terry Patton, who passed away a couple of years ago, not too long ago. He was a wonderful, wonderful person and author, and we corresponded, and I came to feel him as a friend and brother. And he had a beautiful line that said, things that are too serious or have gotten too serious to lose our sense of humor.
Mm.
So I I completely agree with him. because things have gotten so grave that we have to turn this thing around in the next, I don't know, 20, 30 years, not more than that. That's the time frame that we're talking about. So we have to all really get on board with all the changes that we need to bring about together. But at the same time, we can't do it sorrowfully, because there's just no way to live 20, 30 years, in a hopeless or sorrowful mode. We
Yeah,
have to
but
do it
it's so hard
joyfully.
to stay chill with that kind of time pressure. You know,
Of
that's
course,
what
but
just makes it so much more like if you really believe that. And I have friends who are maybe on the extreme end of like they're like preparing for an apocalypse. It's
mm,
really hard for them to relax.
I don't think it's a time for relaxing, really. I think it's a time for embracing it wholeheartedly, passionately, devotedly, and doing what you can.
Finding that endogenous joy
Yeah.
is the outcome of a kind of relaxation. Because when we're feeling like all of the pressure to act and it's like, oh, something's gonna happen and the world is fucked, then it's not the action we're doing does not come from joy, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not advocating for like not acting, but for the acting to
Yeah.
come from a place of what would we call it?
Inner peace, or
Yeah,
yeah.
or at least like
Well,
at least inner desire.
inner desire. Well, I actually differ a little bit there with you, because I do feel, again, I can't remember who said this, but there's a concept that is, you can be pushed by pain, you can push to an action, you can be pushed by pain, or driven or pulled by desire. So a
Mm.
lot of the times, if you think about, look at this amazing planet we're on, and the mountains and the rivers and whatever is most dear to you about it, how can you joyfully, pull up your, what's the expression in English? I can't find it. Roll up your sleeves and get to work on behalf of those rivers that are so important to you, those butterflies, those whatever it is that you are on fire about, the people you love, your grandchildren. But and I know this is very paradoxical, but I do think it can be done. You can do it from a sense of joy, urgency, but joyfulness. It's an urgent joyfulness, if you will. And again, Joseph Campbell had another very controversial line. He said, "You must participate joyfully in the sorrows of the world."
Mm.
So it seems impossible, but it can be done. And the reason it can be done is if it comes from a place of love,
Yeah.
then that's basically the essence of compassion, right? That you feel the suffering or the need, but at the same time you feel the desire to alleviate that. So
Yeah.
there's a kind of joy in that.
I guess maybe that's the distinction I want to make is, I mean, I spent a lot of years as an activist when I was younger, and a lot of it came from, for me personally, from
Yeah.
anger
Hmm.
and from fear.
Yeah.
And what I see now is a lot of the action comes from fear. And
Yeah.
again, maybe it's a powerful motivator. It's like it's been
It
motivating
is.
us for a long time. There's nothing to I respect you, fear. You're very powerful.
Yeah.
Um so yeah, but do you think there's a difference like in terms of sustainability
Definitely.
from
Yes,
fear or
definitely.
from love? Yeah.
I think fear is exactly the word I was going to say. It's necessary, it's a part of it. It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable as an emotion. It's not food for the soul for anybody. And I work a lot with emotions in my courses. I teach a lot about emotions, and I always vindicate fear, which is always so downtrodden. And I hate the people the teachers that oppose fear to love. I don't think they're opposed. I think they coexist all the time in our lives. If you adore your child, of course you're going to be afraid of losing them, or if something happened to them. We all know this. It's absurd to try to deny it. So fear is very much a part of life. But the what some people call the negative emotions, that I don't like to call negative, the afflictive emotions, the difficult emotions like fear and sadness and anger, all have a part, but they cannot be your everyday food and sustenance. They're not built for that. They create a whole system, a whole reaction. They activate your sympathetic nervous system. They get you segregating cortisol. So that's no way to live on a daily basis. They're best lived in short bursts. Something happens, you get angry, you
Yeah.
mobilize. You do something, you get people together. But then when you're working towards that end, you cannot work out of anger alone, because it's just going to eat you up, and it's going to
Yeah.
create a terrible atmosphere. So I do think that it can be rocket fuel if it's anger, especially if it's channeled in the right way, but it really needs to be cushioned in a whole slew of other emotions, such as connection and love and gratitude and generosity and joy for what you're doing, especially if you're doing things with others, which is a really important part of this puzzle. If we don't get together and act with others, it burns you up. It eats you up. You have to be able to work and network with others, even just a couple of neighbors. So as long as you're working with others, there's an inherent joy in doing things with others for an aim that lights you up, right? We all know this.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
nothing
totally. Yeah.
like a shared victory. You do anything in life that turns out well and you're doing it with somebody else and you can celebrate with them. It's just amazing feeling, right? So yeah, I do kind of advocate of a much more, I like to call it vital activism, but you could call it joyful activism. It's got to be embedded in life, in honor or in affirmation of life, and and it has to be with others because it's too much for anybody to take on all the things that must be done. And at the same time, I do think that the small things each of us can do in our daily lives is essential. I don't think it's minor or unimportant because the issues at stake are so large. I do think at some point we all need to sort of come together and bring these different threads together. And that's a project that I'm working on too, kind of an ambitious one. How do we bring all these different pieces of the puzzle, people working for the environment, for human rights, for how do we
Mm.
make a larger story out of all this? But every piece counts, every
Yeah.
action counts.
Well, maybe that's a good transition to the
Okay.
next question or the final stage here, which is about
Okay.
this community, the podcast community, the 10,000 Heroes Show.
Yeah.
And yeah, we want to act together. We want to support each other. We want to, especially in terms of motivation going up and down over time. It's really great to
Yeah.
get the inspiration and support from other people. What what can we do for you?
Oh, that's a
Not
lovely
for your
question.
mission,
I know.
but
I
for you.
know.
Yeah.
Oh, personally? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's so nice. And I was gonna answer something else. Now that you say for me personally, I have to rethink my answer. I write about these things and share proposals. There's one that I'm very in love with now. It's called the Earthrise Project, and it has to do with telling a larger story along with many others. So maybe that's a good place to start. It would, of course, make me very happy to collaborate on that project specifically. So just my name is spelled Fabiana Fondevila. I always spell it from the time I lived in the States is Fabiana because it's impossible otherwise. Fabiana, and my last name Fondevila is Fondevila, and that's my website. You can find the English part of it, and it's all translated. And there I share ideas and proposals and things that people can join if they're so inclined, if their heart resonates with these practices and lines of action that I want to share with others. So yeah, that would be the best way to just write to me and tell me in what ways we can collaborate around these projects and ideas. So thank you for that.
Yeah. So
That's
you're
lovely.
looking for collaborators.
Yes, definitely, definitely. I think that's what it's all about. And especially people that are thinking along the same lines and that want to bring on these two aspects of furthering our own, aliveness and desire as and working to help others do the same. How can we keep those two in mind? And just what one piece that I never mentioned, and I think it's kind of important, is that as we grow older, these two aspects, which at the beginning may feel a little bit contradictory or like if you had to choose, they tend to sort of come together and become much more intertwined until they feel kind of like a heartbeat, like a
Mm.
heartbeat or, an in breath, out breath kind of thing. Your desire is more and more inspired by what happens around you. You desire for the people you love and the people you don't even know to feel fulfilled, and that becomes part of your own personal desire. And when you're working towards others or sharing something with others, that becomes part of what fuels your own joy and your own desire. So it becomes indistinguishable at one point, and it kind of melds together. There's an image that I like. I'm not sure who thought this up, but it's as if when we're younger and we're building our own self, our own ego more consistently, we're a very tumultuous river, sort of going over rocks and it's got a very clear direction. And then as you age and you mature emotionally or spiritually, it becomes kind of a wider and calmer river. And it kind of becomes integrated with the riverbanks. You become as much, the water and the banks. And so there is that sense of everything kind of coming together. Whereas when you're younger, for a time, you need to stress your own individual path, and then you sort of begin to work towards including others. And at some point, it all becomes part of a single thing, a single thread.
Mm.
But I do think we all need to bear the two in mind if we're gearing too much in one direction or the other.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that integration of self and other. Wow. Thank you, Fabiana.
Uh, Thank you. It's been wonderful talking to you. I
I
really enjoyed
love,
it.
yeah, I love all the metaphors and the quotes and just the ideas, the focus on awe and wonder and joy and responsibility. And,
Yeah.
there's this kind of like pushing us forward to act and not just to sit there and contemplate our beautiful spiritual navels. It's really, it's gorgeous. It's a wonderful reminder. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No, no, thank you. I love your project. I love what you're doing. I send you all my blessings for it. And I hope we stay in touch.
Yeah, me too. Fabulous. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful.
If you like this episode, you can join the 10,000 Heroes Club, our own community of purpose, by clicking the link below this video. You'll never miss an episode, you'll have opportunities to nominate the people I interview and the questions I explore. But perhaps most importantly, you'll have an opportunity to share your dreams and your needs in a safe space of mutual intention and trust.